Victory laps are encouraged on the show.
I know.
Welcome to Fringe Element here on the 440 Sports Network. My name is Braden Gall, and you can follow me on Twitter at Braden Gall.
Mine's Aaron Dugan. You can follow me on Twitter at the Aaron Dugan or Instagram, Aaron_Dugan.
A lot of fun stuff on the stuff. A lot of fun stuff on the show today. Show has an H in it. That's the word that has the H in it. A lot of fun stuff. Check out the YouTube page. Please rate, review, and subscribe. Many people are talking about it. Ralph Russo is going to be our guest on the show today. He was down in Destin. This is like our yearly rite of passage. He was down there last year. We covered it. We told you what was going to happen with the scheduling. Hopefully you listened, because that's what happened. And then Ralph's going to cover all the inner workings and then some other thoughts on some other teams throughout the SEC as he was down there from the Associated Press, the AP, of course, National College Football Writer podcast is the top AP Top 25 podcast, of course. He'll be responsible for putting that together coming up in August. So we're going to talk with him a little bit later on. The focus of today's show, Aaron, is going to be on week one. And not like a regular week one preview necessarily, but sort of the implications of the big games in week one. Because as you look at the schedule in week number one for the SEC, there are 4 or 5 teams that could have their entire season decided, or at least the trajectory of the season decided in week number one. So that's going to be a vast majority of the show today. We'll talk about tampering and what you can or cannot do about it. I don't understand why people are upset about this. Coaches clearly upset about tampering. I don't know if fans are, though. So we'll ask. Well, I'd like to ask you, the fan out there, if you're upset about tampering. Otherwise, I'd like to start the show with just asking, how do you feel to be an alumni of the second best college baseball program in the state of Tennessee? What I'd like to ask.
Well, that was a strong start by you. I believe we had a conversation last year that was different than this one.
I don't recall.
You know what? It hurts, but it's fine.
Vandy eliminated in the regional. Tim Corbin, classic Tim Corbin, very pissed off after the loss in the super regional.
Corbs really isn't a big losing guy. He doesn't love it.
No, he does. Not a fan. not a fan. So super regional baseball this weekend. South Carolina at Florida. Tennessee advances in insane fashion with that 3-run jack in the last strike in the top of the ninth against Clemson. Just extraordinary drama. Tennessee at Southern Miss. You got Texas, future member, at Stanford. Alabama at number 1 Wake Forest. So the Alabama story is fascinating. The coach getting fired, and now they have to play number 1 Wake Forest. If they somehow make it through Wake Forest to Omaha, what a story that's going to be. And then Kentucky at LSU, which is just South Carolina, Florida is such a great and underrated baseball rivalry. They've played I feel like they've played so much in the playoffs and in the tournament and in Omaha. So we should check on that. And then Kentucky, LSU with the best player in the world, Dylan Cruz. So just you got some other ones. Oral Roberts.
SEC.
Yeah, six of the 16 from the SEC, but 2 of them playing against each other. So we shall see. But Tennessee advances, Vanderbilt does not. I just wanted to start the show with that information in case you had forgotten, Aaron Dugan, about that. For those watching on YouTube, you'll see her answer. All right, quick victory lap for us. We told you last week what we think is going to happen with SEC scheduling 8 versus 9 is that they are going to punt the ball down the road, use the excuse that the next 2 years are going to be sort of new, and we're going to learn stuff about the committee and about Texas and Oklahoma joining the league. And sure enough, much to Greg Sankey's chagrin, they decided on a 1-year, 8-game schedule for next season without divisions with Texas and Oklahoma. I think it's a stupid decision, but I understand why it happened. Apparently, the voting was, and again, we'll talk about this a little bit more with Ralph Russo, but Alabama seemed like the linchpin here that shifted it all one direction after 10 years of Nick Saban talking about wanting to play 9 conference games.
I bet Greg was unpleasant in that meeting.
So Florida, Georgia, Texas A&M, Missouri, of all teams, we're all very much pro 9 games. So Missouri and Florida actually doesn't benefit them, but they're very much pro 9 games. You had specific teams that were against it, Kentucky most notably, Ole Miss, Mississippi State as well. And then you had this 4 group of teams that were unsure. South Carolina was like, we'll just vote wherever the majority goes, which is fine.
Yeah. Get out of the meeting.
Right.
Go to the bar. What's Shane doing? Whatever.
He's Cruton. And so what happened is Tennessee or Alabama and Nick Saban decided, no, we want 8 because we're unhappy with our permanent crossovers, which are LSU, Tennessee, and Auburn, which then Auburn gets cover. Like Alabama offers cover to Auburn to say, no, we also want 8 because that's what Alabama wants. And then it starts to snowball from there, and all of a sudden there's too many votes, and so they're stuck at 8. I think it's kind of ridiculous, but it is what it is. And we told you this was going to happen last week. So
and leave it to Braden that if we are right, we will remind you.
Victory laps are encouraged on the show.
I know. And did you take one in college? I just want to take a low blow since you started off the show with one.
Did I take one in college? You mean like
a 5th year?
No, 4.5. 4.5
okay,
years.
That's fine.
Which is 5 football seasons, but less money than 5 years and less time.
True.
So I graduated December. I graduated. I was a December graduate. Also, your ceremony is way shorter and way more fun than if you graduate. This is true.
I still think scheduling wise that I think that Alabama was very blunt about what the problem was with it. And but I still think there's an underlying, hope that there's potentially more negotiation on the money side, a year into this. But I do think that a lot of it wasn't that, because Sankey wouldn't want it that bad either if it was not the best monetary decision. But I do think there's some underlying potential, or people holding out for potentially more money because of that. But we saw Alabama loud and clear, and the beginning of that snowball effect, which started with their permanent rivals.
Yeah, and we've kind of beaten it to death. You guys know how we feel about it, and Ralph Russo is going to cover sort of the inner workings of how it all went down in Destin. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on. We did not discuss, however, last week. We mentioned it on the show, and tampering is this thing that every coach in Destin was really complaining about. And I've just been thinking about tampering a lot. Like the most, who knows how much and who. And I don't like that coaches come out and say 100% I know that this player was tampered with, and then they don't name names because they're scared that they're probably going to get called on it too. So I don't like that. Everyone's kind of doing it. My first question is, do fans care? I'm sure if you are trying to think here of a really good example, if you're an Ole Miss fan and your superstar tailback Quinshon Judkins gets poached by USC or Ohio State because they get offered a huge NIL thing, which doesn't really happen to the SEC teams all that much. So this is really a question to SEC fans. Yes, Ole Miss fan would be furious about that, would be upset about that. But don't tell me that Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin are not constantly in the portal talking to other players on other teams all the time. The NCAA says you are not allowed to contact players until they get into the portal.
Who are not in the portal, yeah.
Right. But how do you stop? All these players know each other. All these coaches know each other. All the strength and conditioning coaches know each other. All these NFL style.
It's not realistic.
Right. Like Barton Simmons, our friend at Vanderbilt, is not technically a member of the coaching staff, but he runs the personnel department, which is now very much like an NFL style personnel scouting department, because you're scouting other teams for players now too. They all know each other. They all know each other too. I don't know how you stop someone from sending a text message to someone they know. That is human relationship that happens in every walk of life, in every business. Yeah. So go ahead. I'm just
that's this impermissible contact is what they're calling it. But the thing is, people already have numbers in their phones. And even if you don't, here's the perspective from the student athlete, or at least it would be if it were me, is you inevitably do cost your relationship with your current coaches, your current coaching staff, and your training staff and your AD when you enter the transfer portal, because you're telling them, I don't really know if this is a good fit for me, or I don't really want to be here anymore, or I'm really considering other options. And honestly, if it were me, I'm not saying you should break the rules, but I'm also saying some rules are stupid. Whereas unless you know that there's a place for you somewhere else, you're probably not going to want to enter the transfer portal and potentially sacrifice some of the strength of your current relationships at your current school. Because if you have two people that are otherwise equal and someone thought about leaving, who are you going to play? The person that really wants to be there. And
right.
From a student athlete's perspective, unless you know there's somewhere else to land or somewhere else that really wants you, you're not going to sacrifice your relationship with your school to do that.
Every single one of you listening has probably a job. God bless you if you don't. But every single one of you listening probably has a job. Are you just going to quit your job? Like, unless your job is so freaking god awful that you're just like, I've got to get the fuck out of here.
It's just going to your boss and saying, hey, I don't really like it and I might switch jobs.
Like, you can't, yeah, exactly. Like, you can't go to your job.
They're going to be like, okay, well,
right.
I'm not going to give you any more responsibilities now.
What is your boss going to be like? I saw you perusing LinkedIn. How are you feeling about your current role here? Like, no, you don't. What happens is
some bosses do that actually, but
maybe you line up your next stop, your next job, you interview on the DL, you go through the process, you accept the job, you put your 2 weeks notice in, and you leave. That is how the entire world works in America. Yeah. So don't tell me that a kid because the kid enters the portal and then the next day commits to new school. I don't care that there was a communication before that, and which is technically called tampering, and coaches are complaining about it. I don't know. All these players are on these Elite 11 circuits together. They're all in these 7-on-7 circuits together. They all are in the rankings together. Like, they all grew up. Some of them grew up as friends in the same area. Like, I don't know how you stop this stuff from happening, nor do I really. And here's I think the more important question. Like, I want a kid to have a landing spot when he goes into the portal. A lot of kids don't right now.
And it hurts them if they don't sometimes. Yeah. So that's my answer is I don't care, because I don't think banning any and all contact before the portal is necessarily in favor of the student athlete. And that's about as far as my level of caring goes.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I don't care. It's not good for them, because if you're going to land, some people land in the portal and never get out. In fact, the percentage on that is staggering.
It's going to get better. I agree with you.
It is going to get better, but it would be alarming if you saw, and in some sports are different, like numbers in baseball are higher than other sports and all that, but it's a staggering number when you see kids that enter the transfer portal and never get scooped back out of it.
Yeah, don't quote me on this, because you go in with a scholarship and you could come out without one is what we're getting to
100%.
And I think the number, I want to say it's like a third. Like, if 2,000 players go into the portal, it's like 500-600 players that don't have a landing spot, and that number has come down over the first
that might be in football, but it's higher
in football. Yeah. And that number is coming down, I think, as we understand the system better and kids make smarter decisions. But again, like, here, let's give another example. Ohio State missing a quarterback. Alabama missing a quarterback. They lose CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. If Nick Saban's staff or personnel or a player on his team goes to KJ Jefferson personally, like, KJ Jefferson's from Mississippi. Don't tell me he doesn't know someone on Alabama's team. Like, he was recruited by Alabama's coaching staff. Don't tell me he doesn't know some of the lower level staffers in the Alabama coaching staff, or even Ohio State, let's say. And they reach out to him and they say, look, we're going to replace Bryce Young. We're going to replace CJ Stroud. Will you come play for us? Are you interested? Yeah, I'd be interested in transferring. I understand Arkansas fans would be furious about that.
Yeah.
But how do you stop that from happening? Because coaches are willing to say, again, they will say, oh, I know for a fact that so-and-so was paid the money to leave my school to go to that school. And then they will not name names. They are scared to name names, because you want to know why? They're all doing it.
Yeah. Well, and but just like players know each other and know other coaches, all the schools know that the other schools are doing stuff, and they probably know exactly what it is and could name names. But what does that do? Just reflects the attention back on them. So like, oh, you want to play that game?
Right.
Okay, well, I know what you did with this, and this kid.
Right.
It's very incestuous in terms of information. It is free flowing in all directions.
Yeah. There is a reason that none of these coaches will ever name names. There's a reason.
It's going to start getting people are starting to get like anonymous letters in the mailbox.
Yeah. So again, I think the lesson here is to understand the perspective of how much it's exactly like every one of your lives out there, and for the athletes, and that these coaches are kind of hypocritical and complaining about it because they're all doing it too. So I think I just don't think it's as big of an issue as people need to, like, coaches are making it this huge thing.
There's no viable solution either. So,
no.
And we're treating them more like actual, like, compensated employees, which, by the way, is a lot of what they are in addition to student athletes, because there is one of the largest grossing industries in the world is making a ton of money because of them. So we're going to treat them like that. In some ways, you got to treat them like it in others. And it doesn't matter, because the best thing for them is not blindly going into the transfer portal a lot of the time. So that's all that really matters to us, I think.
It's called silly season in racing, like F1, NASCAR, IndyCar. It's called, like, the tampering era of the year. It's like on the calendar. It's called silly season. NFL.
Well, what do coaches do?
Yeah, exactly. How do they? Oh, you want to come be my assistant head coach?
Coaches don't have to enter the transfer portal to have a conversation.
There is a period of time on the NFL calendar called the legal tampering period. It's called the legal tampering period, which makes no sense at all. Just the phrase.
It really does. It's like an oxymoron itself.
Yeah, right. So again, I think there's some perspective.
Anyways.
Yeah, I just think there's perspective here. It's like, look, I understand if your favorite team loses one of your favorite players, that sucks. Mm-hmm. But your coach is doing it too. Their coach is doing it. Everybody's doing it. It's just the way the world works. No one leaves their job. I should say no one. Very rarely does any one of you leave your job without having another job already lined up. And that is tampering in theory. So it is what it is. Unless your boss and your job sucks so bad.
Again, don't go to your boss at your job and say, hey, I really hate it here, but I don't have a plan of what I'm going to do next. And what do you think about that? I don't think it's going to go
well. Hey, Mr. Boss, I am unhappy here and am actively seeking employment elsewhere.
But I have no real game plan, nor do I know if anybody else is going to hire me.
Oh, man. All right. So week number 1, and we'll talk with Ralph Russo coming up about some more of that stuff as well. Week number 1, I thought we could do a quick week number 1 preview, look ahead to the very first week of college football, get some people excited about actual ball. And as I was looking, of course, there's your host of FCS, cupcake blowouts that's going to happen. But there are a handful of teams where I started looking at this and I'm like, all right, Vanderbilt's over unders 3.5. They're going to play Hawaii in week 0 on the road. Nice trip for Vanderbilt, by the way. Then they're going to host Alabama A&M at home. They are an 18.5-point favorite against Hawaii. If they win both games and you've got the over on 3.5 wins, they are going to be probably at 2 coming out of week number 1. And you're probably going to hit the over, just like we told you to hammer the over last year. So I was looking at this schedule going like, man, there's a lot of things that could be decided, namely the Florida Gators, the South Carolina Gamecocks, the LSU Tigers, the Vanderbilt Commodores. I think we need to alert to people that Virginia is awful and that Tennessee is not going to be challenged necessarily in that game. Although, Aaron, with all of these games, there is something to be learned in all of these games. So I don't know where you want to start here, but we can start with Vanderbilt, because at Hawaii may have looked like an interesting game a couple of years ago, but they are almost a 3-touchdown favorite. And if they start 2-0, your over bet's looking really good. Right.
Now, I mean, well, it is, but this is the skeptic in me, because I have a history of loving being a fan of teams that struggle consistently throughout my entire life. But what we also probably need to address is, even though that sets Vanderbilt up for the best chance of hitting the over, that middle tier of the SEC, and I know we've talked about hammering things home over the course of the last several months, but that middle tier of the SEC is better than it has been. So you can't look at Kentucky and say, oh, probably. You definitely can't be Vanderbilt and say probably against Kentucky. You definitely can't look at like Missouri and say probably. There are a lot of games on here that are still going to be, you can look at, South Carolina and say, I hope, or maybe. You could look at Auburn and say, if it's still on fire in a shitstorm like it was, maybe, but also difficult. There's not 2 other easy ones on there.
Well, you play at
UNLV. That's true. So to get us a 3, but then you got to
one more.
Okay, Missouri or Kentucky. Those are still hard.
No. They're all hard games, but they won a couple of those games last year.
I know. It's doable.
Did well in the non-conference. I just mean that if they go 2-0, which they're probably going to do, I think I would take
I would
I would
take
take
it.
the over.
I
Yeah,
would take it because I think they'll pull one off, but it's not a gimme if you win those two.
I agree. So here's another interesting one. So South Dakota at Missouri on Thursday night. Missouri's 6.5. That's an automatic. I mean, that's pretty much a W for Missouri. So if they win that one, that's one they have to hit the over on 6.5. But Florida at Utah.
That's hard too.
Florida, Utah,
Looking at Missouri's schedule.
Oh no, I know
6.5.
I like the over.
You do?
Yeah.
What would they be?
Well,
you don't have to spend too much time on this. But what would
I'm focused on week 1, Aaron, not the whole schedule. We'll do over later.
I
like the over. I like the over on Missouri. I like the over.
Okay.
But I remember I've been telling you this. Last year it was LSU. The year before that was Kentucky. I always have a team where I'm like underrated. Missouri's underrated.
Okay.
In Athlon, they're 50th and 13th in the conference. I guarantee you they finish better than that.
I think they'll finish better than 13th in the conference as well. I'm with you.
Florida at Utah on Thursday is fascinating. So here's the things you need to know about the matchup. Cam Rising is like the 7th-year starter quarterback. They're the defending Pac-12 champs. He's really, really good. But he is coming off an ACL tear in the bowl game, which means he is not probably going to be either healthy or ready to play in that game. So you're going to probably go to a new quarterback if you're Utah. It's only a 9.5-point spread for Utah at home in a very difficult place to play.
Yes.
Florida's total is 5.5. This was like the Anthony Richardson coming out party last year in the Swamp where they won a great game against that team. Utah's not quite as good, but neither is Florida. Here's the thing to me. This is sort of like house money for Florida in this situation. You're on the road against a preseason top 10 team. You're only a single-digit underdog. Your win total is 5.5. If you somehow go out there and pull an upset, you have changed the entire narrative of the Florida Gators football program in one game on Thursday night before week 1 even really happens.
Yeah, because if you win that game at Utah, which is that Thursday night game, like you said, then you are likely setting yourself up to go 3-1 through the first 4 weeks. If you can do that, that 5.5. I think if Florida wins at Utah, I'd take the over on them all day. I still think they could. Do you still think they could pull it off?
I don't know. I think it's.
I guess we're not doing the whole season.
No. I think specifically about Utah, I think it's a very, very difficult matchup. Utah's one of the most physical teams in all of college football. Extremely fundamentally sound.
I don't know.
You don't like Florida in that game at all.
I don't know if I like Florida in that game.
I don't either.
If Florida pulls it off, 3-1 momentum, you're right, has because then they've got McNeese, Tennessee, and Charlotte. So if you can do that,
Tennessee. They could beat Tennessee.
They could, but I'm not going to give it to them right now.
When's the last time Tennessee won in Gainesville?
It is
100 years ago.
It's in Gainesville. Well,
yeah,
but Tennessee's also better than they have been.
If
you do that, you could go 5 and you could go 6-0 if you beat Tennessee because you've got Kentucky and Vanderbilt after that. Kentucky's hard,
but so is Tennessee, so is Utah. I'm not saying these games aren't hard, and they could lose all 3 of them and be 3-3.
Right, but you're right. The Utah would be probably change the whole trajectory of the season for Florida. I totally agree with that.
Certainly changes the conversation around Florida might be the only team that we don't have we're questioning here. They have one of the lowest win-loss totals in the league outside of Vanderbilt. It's 5.5. I guarantee you Vegas is counting this as a loss. So if they were to pull off an upset and all of a sudden Graham Mertz and the offense looks better, and more importantly the defense with old Spurrier Jr. there, Austin Armstrong, the 28-year-old defensive coordinator, if they somehow figure something out against a Utah team that is not going to have its starting quarterback, that maybe they do something crazy like they did last year, and I guarantee you Vegas is counting that as a loss. So
question marks start to dissipate if they can pull that off. But in Utah, yes, the quarterback thing is going to make it a little bit more difficult. They do have a lot of good upperclassmen veteran leadership on that team. And it's at home on a Thursday night, one of the first games of the season. So I'd love to be at that game. But
for you SEC fans, one of your bucket list places to go watch a football game should be Utah. It is unbelievable atmosphere. It's very SEC. You guys would love it. Ball State at Kentucky is the first game on Saturday. That's a 26.5-point spread. Got to win that one. Going to be interesting to see Devin Leary and the new offense and everything. 6.5 win total for Kentucky. So if you lose or somehow lay an egg, they almost lost to Tennessee Chattanooga last year, I think. So they got to win that one. But if you do, you're in good shape. Virginia, Tennessee here in Nashville. I think people look at this and they go, "Oh, Power 5 versus Power 5." But Virginia is a dumpster fire right now in terms of the entire organization, the recruiting, the talent level. Tennessee is a 27-point favorite over a Power 5 team. It is going to be a blowout.
And what will be a home game, essentially.
Yeah, right, exactly. So to me, it's mandatory must win. Really, it's more about just how good is Joe Milton. Let's see how good he is. And if he torches a bad Virginia defense, then at least we know. The thing we know about Tennessee is generally that with Heupel's offense is that the floor is pretty high. They're going to beat teams that they are clearly better than, and they are clearly better than Virginia. So any struggle there will show us some. It's almost all negative if anything happens in this game for Tennessee, right? Like it's
for sure. Yeah.
But you win by 4 touchdowns. That's what you're supposed to do. So
also like a very backloaded schedule, but I do think there's a lot. I do think that there's a lot of upside for momentum. I mean, there's something about going 2, 3, 4-0 that just gives people this like unwavering confidence that they can just keep going. But what's win totals for Tennessee supposed to be according to Vegas?
It's 9.5, and I don't gamble much. I'm going under on that. So
I go under on that too.
I do not think they're a 10-win team.
If you're making a preseason bet, I think that's.
I was going to do a whole episode on over/under win total bets, but
I can't. Well, it's hard. I'm staring at the schedule.
I know. Mercer at Ole Miss. Okay, let's see who's at quarterback. That'll be interesting. UMass at Auburn, 39.5-point favorite. Again, what does the offense look like? New quarterback, Hugh Freeze's debut. Western Carolina at Arkansas. Not a point spread. Southeast Louisiana at Mississippi State. No point spread there. UT Martin, thoughts and prayers. UT Martin at Georgia. T's and P's there. No question about that. Alabama A&M at Vanderbilt. We already touched on that one. And then New Mexico at Texas A&M. That's a 37.5-point game right now. Texas A&M, huge favorite. But, like, what does the offense look like with Bobby P. and Connor Wigman? Should be fun to watch there. So there's a lot of new, interesting stuff to watch in week 1 before we get to the big games. Middle Tennessee at Alabama, 37-point favorite there. We got 2 big ones here to discuss at the end. But anything you want to add to any of those very, very lopsided matchups?
I mean, I think it'll favor Texas A&M to be able to start the season with a little bit of a test run. I don't think it's the year that Texas A&M would want to face, any sort of rival or, like big, like if I'm Texas A&M, I don't want to play Utah for the first game of the season. Like Florida's going to be better set up to at least take a stab at that than Texas A&M would. I think they need some time to get their footing.
Oh, I disagree. I disagree about that. I don't think Florida's ready.
I don't think they're, but I don't.
I think A&M's. I think A&M's ready.
You do?
Yeah, I think they're going to be.
I hope you're right because I want a good Texas A&M bet. I'm not saying Texas A&M is better than Florida, but there's something to me about Texas A&M that like just needs like I just haven't seen any. I haven't seen it yet. So just to have that slower start to be able to test things out and see how it goes. I mean, I wouldn't want to play Utah.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to play Utah week number 1 either. I do think my point is I think Texas A&M with Bobby Petrino, all those 5 stars on defense, I think their roster's in far better shape better
equipped to.
Yeah, like I think A&M Utah like on a neutral field in Dallas or something would be an awesome, like very even, very interesting, like defensive minded Whittingham versus offensive Petrino. I think it would be a great football game. I do not. I
want a good Texas A&M back.
Yeah, good A&M, and good Jimbo makes for drama because then they can either.
I mean, Mad Jimbo makes for drama too, but like I'd rather have a good Texas A&M than a Mad Jimbo. I think, although it's close.
Well, that's true. I see your point, but I think when they're good, here's what I want. I want a building of the hype for Texas A&M as the season goes along, because then no matter what happens, it's fascinating. They either crash and burn, and we get Mad Jimbo and crazy fans. Or they do something interesting, which then sets them up for more crash and burn later, and or finally breaking through. So, like either way, A&M is fascinating either way. And
they're like the reality character. They're like the unpredictable reality character on a show.
And when I asked Ralph Russo, like, what are his favorite storylines heading into media days, like A&M was at the top of his list. So,
I don't blame him.
I agree. All right, that brings us to the 2 big ones, and it's not even just win total bets that are on the line here. For South Carolina against North Carolina. in Charlotte, LSU against Florida State in Orlando, neutral site games. Charlotte, of course, North. We'll start with South Carolina. It's a 1.5 point spread. I believe South Carolina is an underdog in this game. Their win total is 6.5. North Carolina is not good on defense, so South Carolina and Rattler and those boys should be able to score with the weapons that they have. I don't know if they can stop Drake Maye and North Carolina's offense, but it does feel like with South Carolina's schedule being as difficult as it is, that a lot of their season hinges on how they play in week one. And if they beat North Carolina, they can hit the over, they can keep the momentum going, and their season could be pretty darn good. If they lose, and then you look at that schedule with Clemson and all those other teams in the SEC, I could see it unraveling quickly, and that's not a shot at South Carolina. It is purely a comment on how difficult their schedule is.
What did you say the win total is supposed to be?
6.5.
Yeah, it'd be tough. I would argue that in a per game, like if you're looking at South Carolina in one particular game or over the course of this season, I would say based on the last couple of years of since Shane Beamer's been in his position, I think they are less weighed down by being behind than most other teams. Like I think South Carolina,
you mean like
their ability to
on the scoreboard,
like their ability to answer both in one single game, even when they're behind, and also to not be discouraged by, like, I watched Vanderbilt over the course, like it depends on that momentum a lot of the time. South Carolina, no matter what happened the week before, I do think their ability to kind of erase it and start over is better than some teams. They can shake things off.
That's a culture. Yeah, that's a culture.
It's a cultural thing. And like Spencer Rattler and, everyone behind him can answer in situations even when they're down. So I do think that, in order to hit the over, they need it. But I don't necessarily think it's going to determine. I don't think they'll just go down the drain if they don't.
No, but it's almost like if they can stop Drake Maye, and by stop him, it means like sort of contain him to some degree.
Or answer against him.
Right. Well, so here's what I'm getting to about the defense.
Okay.
They're not going to play South Carolina. While their schedule is extremely difficult, they are not going to play too many quarterbacks like Drake Maye. Maybe Joe Milton is good enough to be that. I don't know. I don't know. Georgia's a totally different team. I'm not even counting Georgia.
Don't count Georgia.
But like Clemson's not better on offense than North Carolina. Kentucky's got a pretty good quarterback, but they're not better than Drake Maye. Nobody in the East, especially the East, is going to be better from a quarterback standpoint. And if you can defend Drake Maye even just a little bit, to me that indicates that South Carolina is going to be far more competitive than if you're taking the under, for example, which I'm not, but like if you are, you're going to learn a lot about South Carolina in week number 1. Because if you can stop Drake Maye even just a little bit, there's not many players on the schedule that are going to be better than him at that position. And the biggest questions to me, the two things about South Carolina, like the defense, Rattler's consistency in the offensive line, but the defense is huge. Like we don't know how good that defense is going to be. So they lost NFL players. They lost their 5-star recruits. Like they've lost a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So that's where I think South Carolina is. That game is one of the most interesting games in all of college football.
It is like you kind of get like a compass from that game of where it's headed. And I don't know. It's just hard to doubt what South Carolina could pull off. And there's 6 games on their schedule that I could be like, I think it could do that. And then just one more crazy one from them, it could happen.
I think it's the North Carolina, South Carolina game that
would be the tipping point.
That indicate like either they hit the over because they win or they hit the under because they lose.
I think you're right.
And it could define their season, even though it happens at the very beginning. When you look back, like, again, extremely difficult schedule. They're going to lose some games. But if they're 7-5 and they've beaten a couple of those teams and they beat North Carolina, one of their rivals kind of in the area, I think fans are still okay with that as long as it shows that looks like there's progress. I know they want to be a contender in the East, but I don't think they're there yet. But again, you beat Drake Maye in North Carolina week 1 pretty easily. You may change the conversation then.
Agreed.
Which brings us to the best game in all of college football in week number 1, LSU and Florida State. LSU 2.5 point favorite. Remember, this was a final play of the game in New Orleans, Florida State victory on a 2-point conversion last year. This is now in Orlando. LSU, very different situation now. A lot of expectations, 9.5 wins. Florida State is really, really, really good. Yep. They are really good. I think
coming off 10 wins, and their roster's like still almost completely intact.
Yes,
from last year, so they've just built on that.
They got better in the there's no question. What's interesting is I think they are 5-6, or no, 6-7 in the Athlon Sports preseason magazine. So they are basically thought of evenly in the preseason expectation category. Florida State is the favorite over Clemson to win the ACC. LSU might be the favorite over Alabama to win the West again. I don't know about that. I'd probably still lean Bama. That game's in Tuscaloosa. But this is a playoff game. This game decides the playoff. If LSU wins, they are a playoff contender. If Florida State wins, they are a playoff contender. It does not get any better in week 1 than LSU and Florida State, unless it was on a home freaking campus. It was on a campus, played in a college football stadium. It'd be great.
I hate that it's not.
Ugh,
it's
brutal.
It's like such, I don't know. It's such a disservice, but
at least whatever. New Orleans with LSU feels kind of like a game. You know, does that make sense? There's like a little bit more of a college vibe there as a neutral site, but like not Orlando.
No, not State. At all.
You know, it's like a 6-hour drive from Tallahassee.
I mean, I'm sure it'd be fun, and if I had the opportunity to go, I would. But if, on Florida State's campus or in Death Valley, I mean, come on. How freaking wild that would be.
Right, exactly.
Plus, you can't grill gator in a parking lot in Orlando. It just feels wrong. Although there's plenty.
Oh, I don't know. If I'm an LSU fan, I'm grilling this. If I'm Florida, if there's one,
they probably won't catch it till they get there.
If there's one thing that unites Florida State and LSU fans, it is their hatred of the Gators.
That's true.
There's no question about that.
That is true.
I hope game day is down there and they got all kinds of anti-Florida signs.
It's got to be, right?
Sides. Well, there's some big games in other conferences.
Is that on Saturday?
It is on Sunday evening, standalone game. Going to be so much fun.
What did you say last week about college football never being played on a Sunday? It's because NFL season hadn't started. That's why.
Yes, and it's because it's like that every year. It's the first week of the year. It's never ever played on Sunday ever again after that.
Okay, we'll see.
And it's never going to happen.
Yet.
I would love it. I would love it to happen. I hope you're right, but you are wrong.
No, it's going to go Thursdays before it goes that way.
Maybe Fridays, actually. Think about it.
Yeah, Fridays would make more sense.
I still don't think the SEC is ever going to move off Saturday.
I don't want to fight with you right now. Do we need to say anything about?
I want one match. I got one matchup point about LSU Florida State.
Okay.
And this is for those that don't study Florida State. I would assume most college football fans know a lot that Florida State's going to be very good. Jordan Travis, very good quarterback, All-American caliber player, great receivers, good offensive line, good defensive line, good pass rush, NFL players all over the place. The system is now installed by Mike Norvell in like year number 4. They are a very, very good down the field passing football team. Mm-hmm. And the one area of concern for LSU is the secondary.
Right.
So that would be the matchup that would concern me if I'm an LSU fan. If Perkins and Smith and those guys in the front 7 can get after Travis, then I think LSU wins the game. If Travis has time, I think Florida State wins the game because I don't think they're going to be able to cover for that 3-4 seconds that you got to cut. Like, Florida State is too good down the field. Too many athletes. Jordan Travis's arm is awesome. I just think
it's a good point.
I think I like Florida State to win the game, but I think it's mostly about can they get to the quarterback at LSU, and if they can, I think they win. But that game has so much. It's so much fun. Both fan bases are kind of gritty, like I just love the whole thing. It's great.
We could talk about even that game in even more detail next week. I know we're like running long, but I think there is a lot of like intricate, like kind of like X's and O's details that will make that game really interesting. Like what you just brought up, like Florida's concerns, like defensively in that capacity.
Yep. At 9.5 for LSU. I don't think I would take the over.
I don't think I would either. But
if you beat Florida State, that's where you could get to 10-2 pretty easily. So we'll see. It's all about that Florida State.
I wouldn't take that bet if you're teetering on the line of taking it.
I think LSU, Florida State, North Carolina, South Carolina. I think those two games, the game could decide the over under for both teams.
Mm-hmm.
Is kind of how I feel. And again, neither point spread is a field goal. They're both 2 points or less, basically. So. Should be. I like the point of this is to like get hyped up for week 1, and there's just there's a lot of blowouts, but there's a lot of intrigue in week number one. And I think it's going to be an awesome, awesome football season in the SEC. Okay. All right. Well, Ralph Russo was down in Destin. Check out the YouTube page, of course. Rate, review, subscribe. We do really appreciate all your support. Ralph Russo was down in Destin. He talked about Alabama's dynasty. We talked about his most interesting storylines, Tennessee, Texas A&M, a few others. But mostly we talked about what the hell is going on with scheduling, what is going on with tampering, what's going on with Nick Saban and the SEC lobbying Congress. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that was down there in Destin. So he's going to give us a recap of what he saw down in Destin. Here was my conversation with the AP's Ralph Russo. Ralph, welcome to the show, man. How are you, sir?
Doing great. Enjoying a little bit of it. There's no off season anymore, right? we're go right from we're maybe a little pause in talking season is all we're in right now, but doing great.
Yeah, it's a breath between sentences inside of talking season. That's all it is. Ralph was, of course, you were down in Destin. A couple of great pieces by you about the scheduling conflict as well as what's going on with tampering. Obviously, you can make sure you check out the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. I hear it's a great episode this week, so go check that out. Great week, great episode every week. But make sure you're listening to that show. And I will ask you when that AP poll is coming out. I know we're a long ways off, but I'd like to know how long it takes you to formulate that whole thing. All right, just down in Destin. I said last week on the show, my prediction was going to be they were going to settle on 8 temporarily because they have this sort of 2-year trial period of studying what could be a 12-team playoff and sort of like how it's going to function and what the committee does. And sure enough, that's how they ended up. But outside of that, what is the overwhelming thing that these 14 football coaches are concerned about, are scared of, are worried about? What is the thing that is bothering them the most? Because it seems like everything is bothering them, Ralph.
Yeah, we're in a period of college football where there's a lot of angst about things that the coaches especially can't really control, which of course makes coaches really anxious when they can't control things because they are control freaks. I think that things at the top of the list is still NIL and this idea that it is an unlevel playing field. I mean, Nick Saban kind of went on a bit of a rant. I hate to even call it a rant because that makes it sound like a little unhinged. And the fact of the matter is he makes some good points about level playing field. And if we don't have one rule that sort of governs all of college football, as far as NIL is concerned, doesn't it have an effect on competitive equity? I think Saban's overall point over the last couple of years has sort of been the underlying point, I believe, is this. Either we should be pro football or college football. Like we are sort of caught in between right now. And I think that general theme is echoed by other coaches of like, hey man, just give me one set of rules, just so I know exactly that I'm playing by the same rules that somebody else is playing by. We're cool here. And it's a fair point to say that that's not the case, but I also think it tends to be a little overwrought. Some of the angst, some of the complaining tends to be a little overwrought. And one thing I got to mention with Saban here is, when he talks about competitive balance and other schools are spending more on their roster than, maybe it's allowable in one place more than another and things along those lines, and how that's going to throw off competitive balance in college football. I think it's just interesting to hear somebody say that who's always had a lot of the advantages, right?
Yeah.
Who's always had a program that spends big and always had a program that has a great recruiting footprint. And it's almost like he's ignoring the fact that he has benefited from having a lot of the advantages.
I talked to Shannon Terry last week, CEO of On3. He did an NIL circuit series event here in Nashville. Mm-hmm. I asked him sort of how does all of this finish? Because right now Saban and Greg Sankey and other coaches from the SEC and other sports are up in D.C. lobbying the federal government, which seems like a tremendous use of time. And basically I said, where does this level set at the end of the entire conversation with NIL? And he says it's going to have to end up with a different division of football. So in the maybe that's a long-term view of this, but who is it that actually could put that one uniform rule in place? It's not the states. I doubt it's Congress. Would the conferences have to come together, which again is getting us pretty close to a different division of football?
Well, it's also getting close to simply shifting the emphasis and the legal pressure and the political pressure from the NCAA to this group of conferences that creates a second NCAA. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't play one on TV, but I have to talk to a lot of them these days, more than I ever thought when I first started this job. And the fact of the matter is, like, you know, you start looking at a lot of the pressure that's been put on the NCAA to conform to antitrust laws. If 5 or 6 conferences come together, or maybe 60 schools come together under the banner of several conferences and create this new structure, are they not simply exposed to the same antitrust violations, or the same antitrust issues? So I still think that it's weird, because I find myself thinking there probably needs to be some kind of federal government intervention, but then go back to it like you and saying, like, when are they going to get around to this? Like, I do think that's the formula here, that the federal government essentially sort of waves the magic wand, which you can do because when you're lawmakers, and say, this is now legal. All that stuff, a bunch of the stuff that you were doing before that wasn't legal, now it's legal. And I do think that's the route to something that creates a little more uniformity and a little less chaos. I almost hate to use that word, but I do think that, like, I don't know what the solution is beyond creating a system where some of the stuff that you're doing that is illegal now is no longer illegal.
Maybe I am cynical, Ralph, but we just we can barely avoid worldwide economic collapses of our own doing, much less solving 133 NIL rules all in one fell swoop. So tampering is a part of this. I find it fascinating because tampering's always kind of happened. It happens in every walk of life. If 440 Sports was trying to hire Ralph Russo and you needed to, like, put your 2 weeks notice in to come work at any other job in the world, you would have had a conversation with me prior to putting in your 2 weeks notice. So I don't know how we stop human beings from having human relationships. So there's a lot of talk about tampering, but it's kind of just part of being a human being, right? And like how do we get rid of it? How do you regulate it?
Yeah, so I thought Kirby Smart's now listen, Kirby Smart comes from a position of privilege when it comes to tampering, because he really doesn't have to worry that much about it because he's got such a great roster. Like, guys are going to leave his program, and most of the guys who leave are guys that he probably doesn't necessarily need anyway, and he's going to get to pick and choose. Hey, I need a couple of receivers. Okay, Dominic Levitt, you're on. Ra Thomas, you're on. Let's go. Like, so. But I respect him from that perspective, in that, like, when you're not involved in it, it allows you, when you're not as deeply involved in it, allows you to have a little more clearer thought. And he says sort of exactly what you said. Like, how do you stop trainers from talking, high school coaches, the players themselves? And, you know, as he put it, like, yeah, we have connections to all these people too within our program. So we don't have to talk directly to the kid. Information flows. Information is flowing here. So what is tampering? Yes, I think there are truly examples going on out there. I talked to enough coaches to know that there are legit examples of a coach DMing a player and saying, hey man, if you end up in the portal, we certainly have our eye on you. But I think more of the problem is what you're talking about, is just this other lines of communication. I mean, Jordan, listen, the most high profile situation last year was Jordan Addison leaving Pitt and going to USC in the spring. Jordan Addison is friends with Caleb Williams. Like, I don't know how you stop two ball players from talking to each other. So I think there's a lot. I think Kirby made great points. I do think that, again, there's a lot of angst. There's not a lot of solutions. But I also think that there's not a whole lot you can do about it, but especially because of this idea that you are in a situation where there's all these lines of communications, and how do you shut them down?
I think we all agree that eventually we're going to get to 9 games. In terms of the conference scheduling, they voted on, again, this temporary thing for 2024. Florida, Georgia, LSU, Missouri, Texas A&M, it seems like are all pretty staunchly on the 9, which give them a lot of credit for that, because Florida plays a really, really tough schedule out of conference. Missouri doesn't benefit them necessarily from getting to bowl eligibility. It seems like Kentucky, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and Vanderbilt have long been sort of the head of the eight-game cabal, if you want to call it that. Is this all hinge on South Carolina? It's just, agnostic, apparently. What I think is interesting is Alabama the reason this thing stayed at 8? If Alabama had decided we like our 3 permanents, Greg Byrne and Nick Saban had decided, you know what, we're going to stick with 9 games. Do we have a 9-game schedule right now if Alabama had decided to go that direction?
So I don't necessarily want to give Alabama that much power and Saban that much power. And I do think this, Braden, I think you get different, depending on which AD you happen to get off the record or off to the side, you get a little different view of how these schools are aligned in the room as far as 8 and 9. I know there's been some reporting out there that, it's a 7-7 split. And there's been some, these schools are a little more wishy-washy. And then I talked to some folks and they're like, hey, man, there's a lot more support for 9 than you realize in that room. And I think it sort of comes down to, Greg Sankey likes to tell this story about, back in Mike Slive's day, the old Tennessee athletic director, Doug Dickey, told Mike Slive something to the effect of like, when we leave the room, it's 12-0. When we leave the room, the vote is always 12-0. And I think there's a little of that going on right now where I don't think they feel a great desire to push through a 9-game schedule with holdouts. Right? We want everybody to be unanimous. So there's that. I think there's a built-in excuse. You mentioned the college football playoff and also the fact that Texas and Oklahoma are here sooner. We didn't prepare for Texas. We were thinking this was going to be 25. Right. Now, all of a sudden, everything got moved up a year. Well, you were talking about it last year. So I don't know if that's necessary. But again, it's a built-in excuse of we're getting Texas and Oklahoma sooner than we expected. So now we have to
I see what you did there, by the way.
Yes, yeah, a pun intended.
Well done.
So now we have to address this sooner than expected. And I also think there is the money element too, which is, again, you talk about ESPN. Hey, like we're going to play more conference games. Doesn't that mean like you should be paying us more because you're getting more valuable, a more valuable product? Well, 2 parts about that. ESPN is not in great position to be throwing money around right now. They just laid people off. There's an optics part of that, but
Pat McAfee disagrees, but go on.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's more of an optics thing, I think, more than reality. I think you pay for what is valuable. I think there's also MLB rights, I believe, is coming up in the next year or 2. There's NBA rights coming up, and there's a CFP that they're going to have to get involved in. So I think there's this idea that, well, maybe we stand a better chance of getting a little sweetener from ESPN to motivate us, to convince us that the 9-game schedule is worth it if we pause this for a year or maybe 2. The last part of the ESPN thing, though, is, ESPN doesn't have to give them a damn dime. Like, there's nothing in the contract that says, this is presumptuous of me because we haven't seen the contracts. But as far as we know, ESPN could tell them, you signed it, kick rocks. That's it. You're getting what you're getting.
I'm not sure that would end the way they'd want it to.
The contracts are signed, though. I understand, and I think that eventually they may get a little more money. But the contracts are signed and they're locked in for a while. But yes, I understand the long range.
Yep. You can't
long range. Like, do you want to be a good partner to a conference that is your bell cow?
You cannot provide a broadcast partner of yours with Florida, Oklahoma, and Texas A&M every single year and not get anything for it. It's just not. It's not gonna happen. So,
but it also speaks to the idea, Braden, of the idea of bringing these teams in and not playing them more often is just silly. It's just silly. Yeah. I understand. Okay, well, we're gonna bide our time and we have to be motivated by a little more money and things along those lines, but. Yep. And not to mention, like, you have an 8-game conference schedule with 16 teams. Like, what does that look like in sort of declaring a champion at the end of the year when, I think what will motivate them to go to 9. And listen, they may be going to 9 before we even kick off next season or before, we get far down the road. They may have a long-term plan for 9 in place. Greg Sankey said, we're not going to be in Destin next year debating this issue. So they think this thing is going to be wrapped up before they even play the 8-game, 16-team, schedule.
Right.
But I keep thinking the idea of, like, if you're only playing 8 games, like, what does that look like And are you getting a situation where the schedule happens to lay out in a certain way where, Kentucky ends up going 7-1, Alabama goes 6-2 against what turns out to be a tougher schedule, and now Kentucky's playing for the SEC champion?
There are no reasons other than coaches keeping their jobs. There are no and maybe getting an extra home game as an athletic department budget.
That's the reason why Florida.
No
you talk about why Florida is so gung ho on 9 games with its Florida State. Well, Florida gives up a home game every year with Georgia. Like, that's a big part of why Florida looks at it and goes, we have this neutral site game every year, because Texas talked about that. Texas's AD talked about that up front. Like, hey, of course we want to go to 9. We play a game in Dallas every year. Right. So I think part of Florida's motivation is there too.
And they will be playing, of course, no complaints here from anybody else, Miami, Florida State, and UCF in the non-conference coming up. So, like, they're still playing brutal games outside of the conference. All right, well, let's talk a little football here and let you go. First question is, when the AP poll comes out and you guys are talking about this in a month or two, is Alabama closer to Georgia? Are they closer to Tennessee and A&M and Ole Miss and Arkansas and Kentucky on that third tier? Are they right next to LSU? In your mind, project where they are in the poll, but also in your mind, are they closer to just sort of the next tier of good teams in the SEC, or are they closer to Georgia?
No, so me personally, I think they're closer to Georgia. That's a bit of a bold statement for a program that just decided that Notre Dame's backup quarterback might be the answer for them. So I understand, like, that Tyler Buckner thing set off a big red flag to me, and I think the kid's got some talent and could be a good player.
Yep.
But I still look at, listen, I am stuck with Stars Matter, my buddy and nemesis sometimes at the Athletic.
You're gonna talk about Mitch Light that way?
Well, no, I like Mitch too, but Ari Wasserman, like, I am somewhat of a member of that church, and I look at what Alabama's recruiting rankings look like over the last 4 or 5 years, and I find myself thinking, I don't know who the stars are on Alabama. They are not as obvious as they may have been in past years, but at the end of this season, we might end up with 6 or 7 Alabama guys getting drafted in the first round, and we'll go, oh yeah, they were there all the time.
Yep.
So I'm going to assume that Alabama is closer to Georgia than the schools that you just mentioned. Listen, I think there's a whole lot of momentum for LSU being ahead of Alabama, and I worry about that. Yep. I don't know if LSU's got that kind of depth in just year 2 under Brian Kelly. You're really buying into the Jayden Daniels hype if you think that this is a team that can win a national championship. Daniel's a good player. He made great strides last year, but I'm not sure I'm ready to put all my chips on Daniel. So I think I find Alabama to be almost, is it possible to be underrated going into this season? But I think, like you, when the poll comes out, my suspicion is that, if Alabama is 5th in the country, like, they haven't been that low in the preseason poll in about 10 years.
I know. Alabama
so that's
fans,
a big deal.
Alabama fans are freaking out because they're 5th in the country. Oh my God.
Right.
All right. So we get to Nashville, I should say, in media days, coming here to town. And outside of the championship, that kind of question, right? The Alabama dynasty and all the off the field garbage and, Georgia three-peat, sort of can LSU get back to Atlanta? Like, take those kind of top line stories out of it. This is the healthiest middle class I've ever seen in the SEC. All 14 fan bases are largely happy and excited and have some semblance of optimism going into the year, which is terrifying. I'm just curious, what are the 2 or 3 storylines that you are most interested in seeing unfold throughout the season that you think you might be writing about coming out of media days? Like, these are the stories that I think we need to be paying attention to.
Sure. And I just think when I hear a lot of optimism in the SEC, I just all of a sudden think that, oh my God, that means there's a whole bunch of programs set up to be super angry at the end, midway through the year when they lose a bunch of games. So the number one for me is Texas A&M. And I believe Texas A&M has a chance to have a big year. Yes, I like literally have like a pretty big surge forward kind of year. If you ask me, is Texas A&M more likely to go 10-2 or 6-6? I would say far more likely to go 10-2. How that mix of development of the offense goes with Bobby Petrino. Are they still a team that has chemistry issues underlying? And of course, what that all means if they do end up having a bit of a mediocre year for Jimbo Fisher, who I think is still owed $76 million, something in that ballpark, give or take $1 million or $2 million. It's all fake money. It's all monopoly money,
right.
really. So there's that. I find the Tennessee situation to be super interesting because was that a new level? Was that a new sustainable standard that we saw last year from Tennessee? Or was that a surge that that you would think would be met then by some regression? Right. I think for Tennessee fans, they certainly don't want to hear that. Wait, we're back. This is now what we are. But I still wonder if you remove Hendon Hooker and put in Joe Milton, now are you looking at a school that a team that maybe is now 9-3, 8-4 again, and that I know is very scary to Tennessee fans. And what does that mean after you just doubled Josh Heupel's salary? Right, it's already a pretty. Yep. I think it's fair to say you live in it already a pretty fragile fan base right there.
That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah. So if they see some regression as opposed to no, this is who we are now. We are now a 10-2 program again. If they see some regression, what does that mean at Tennessee?
It's called PTSV. Just so you know, being a Tennessee, it's PTSV. You can have that one.
I mean, I could rumble through a whole bunch. Like the Auburn situation, I think needs some patience. Lane Kiffin and how that ended last year at Ole Miss makes that somewhat of a tenuous situation. But I'm going to go Arkansas only because Sam Pittman kind of came in and really won the hearts and minds of a lot of folks. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at over 3 years, the record is not so great that, like, again, if Arkansas has another 6-6 season, or which is certainly possible, a 7-5 season, what does that mean for Sam going forward? I love KJ Jefferson. We love Raheem Sanders, but again, you play in a tough division. You're probably going to have a hard time getting to even 5-3 in that division. So I just wonder if the coach that comes out of 2023 on the hot seat, not that I think, listen, it's the SEC. Anyone could be fired at any time other than Nick Saban. But I think the coach that could come out of the 2023 season on the hot seat could be Sam Pittman. And again, Sam has been sort of this lovable hero, like everyman kind of coach. But I just wonder if if at the end of last season, when things went a little sour, if the honeymoon ended.
It is utterly fascinating this season. Like South Carolina, Kentucky, Missouri is going to be sneaky good. Like Mississippi State has a new coach in very extraordinary circumstances. Like the whole league is just absolutely fascinating this year. Explain to everybody. Again, check out the podcast. It's the top 25 AP top 25 college football podcast with you. You're going to be putting the poll together here, I assume, in the next 8 weeks, 2 months, give or take. Can you tell everybody
up in late July? Yeah.
Tell everybody quickly. Just give everybody sort of like a rundown of how that process works, so that when they see the list, and then they all take to Twitter to say a bunch of terrible things like about lists, because that's what we do, that they actually have some understanding of what that process looks like for you guys.
Yeah, the best way to say it, we administer the poll. We don't vote. I don't vote. AP employees don't vote. We pick about 64 voters, I think it is, from around the country. Try to be geographically balanced. It is not a formula. It is not a scientific poll. But nonetheless, we try to be geographically balanced. We count them up. We just count up the votes. It is no longer by pen and paper. It used to be, but now it's all automated. People vote online. We count it up. We, make sure there are no mistakes, hopefully, from week to week, and then we put it out. It's as simple as that. I mean, again, you try to find a bunch of people from around the country who have some AP membership, which I won't bore you, but you have to be an AP member news organization. And then we just tell them, listen, kind of like the college football playoff, just give us your top 25. Just give us your best 25 teams. I know people sometimes get a little rankled because we don't provide like really strict guidelines, but I don't think we want guidelines. We want people to do a little bit of, I'm projecting ahead, I'm doing what I see on the rosters right now, because the fact of the matter is this is not scientific. There's no perfect way to do this. And then in the middle of August, we'll unveil the poll. We're usually the last ones out. That's the best way I can describe it. Like, your great magazine will put out a poll, Athlon and other organizations put out polls and rankings throughout the season. Usually ours comes 2 weeks before the start of the regular season. And it's sort of the last word that we like to think sets the agenda for the regular season.
Who leaves SEC Media Days as the West winner, Alabama or LSU?
I still think Alabama. I think the sports writers tend to stick. I think, having done the poll for a long period of time for the same reasons, I think you tend to stick with what you know. I am going to, and I'm guilty of this too, right? I'd rather be wrong picking Alabama.
Right. Yep.
I think there's less chance that I will be wrong, because very rarely does Alabama make me wrong.
Yep. And I use the word maturity of LSU, maybe not quite to like national championship level. And oh, by the way, the game's in Tuscaloosa this year. So I'm with you, Ralph. Thank you so much, man. We appreciate it. Thank you so much for giving us so much of your time. Thank you.
Great, man. And hey, talk to you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. That was Ralph Russo of the AP, and breaking down all the scheduling stuff. Just a bummer we don't have 9 conference games. That's all I really need to add to this. We've talked about this for so many times. So.
It's coming, just not this year.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Hopefully they get it correct. And as he said, we were talking about this at this time last year. We were talking about it this year. Hopefully we're not talking about it at this time next year when they go to Destin for the 2024.
I don't think we will be.
Tennessee
you don't
at Southern.
Seem as hopeful, but it's okay.
No, I'm skeptical, cynical, but I can be convinced that it's going to happen. But money will take it to 9 games at some point.
It will.
There's no question about that.
What about Tennessee?
I was going to say at Southern Miss. Make sure you check out Super Regional action this weekend, Darren. The best college baseball team in the state. At Southern Miss. It's
just I don't have to respond to that. I just don't. When you're better and historically, and I can sit silent on this one. I can.
Okay, how about this?
Okay.
Oklahoma softball team. Holy shit.
No,
coming to the SEC.
Those girls are insane.
God.
They're insanely athletic.
So my 6-year-old daughter has been playing softball. She's in her 2nd year. She's actually not bad. And I'll say the coach has done a good job. Moi on the coach pitch.
Oh, okay.
No, it's all her. Her brain takes to softball very well. She did not take to soccer at all, but loves softball. So we've been watching a lot of softball.
Yeah.
And she's been watching a lot of Lady Vols, and just because the Lady Vols are really, really good. Kiki, shout out to Kiki there with like 25 bombs and 40 stolen bases. One of like 2 players in history to ever do it. She's a stud.
It's ridiculous.
My daughter loves watching her. But like the game moves so fast. The ratings for the College World Series for women are better than the ratings for the TV ratings nationally for the College World Series for men. But like they're one of the best teams in America, the Tennessee Vols, Lady Vols. And my daughter's watching, and they got run ruled by Oklahoma.
That is so. What's the run rule in softball?
I know what it is for 6-year-olds in Nashville. I don't know what it is, but I think
6-year-olds in Nashville, they have a run rule.
Yeah, well, we're trying to keep we don't want there to be like a 15 run inning and then like no one ever gets to play. You only play like 3 innings in 6-year-old softball.
Baseball, I don't remember. It's like 10 over 10 and 8 innings or something.
Yeah, it was 5. It's 5 in 6-year-old baseball in Nashville.
Got it.
Softball. But the point
is
the point is that Tennessee was one of the best teams in the country, number 4 in America, and they are not even competitive against Oklahoma.
It's wild.
Oklahoma has the longest winning streak in history. It's just what they're doing is extraordinary. Oh, by the way, welcome to the SEC next year.
Yeah, that is one. The sport and conference is the level of talent that it takes to play softball in the SEC is insane.
Same with baseball. I mean,
I don't remember what year this was. I think it was maybe my last year at Vandy, so a couple of years ago. But it was like of the top 25, 13 of the 14 SEC schools were in softball, and that's because Vanderbilt doesn't have softball.
What? They need some softball, dude. They got like the best. They got like the best program in one of the best programs in baseball. And
I know.
all joking aside, they are
honestly,
one of the best
it's the space. It's probably the space on campus because it's right in the middle of Nashville. That's why they're adding volleyball instead because they could put it in the gym.
Okay, all right.
But isn't that crazy? It was 13 of the 14 SEC schools, and that's because the 14th SEC school doesn't have softball.
Doesn't have one. Yeah. We are recording this on Wednesday morning, which means you're going to get Game 1 of the championship series, Oklahoma, Florida State on Wednesday. And then, of course, if Florida State survives on Thursday, there'll be another one. But my money's on OU, baby. It's Boomer Sooner in the softball World Series. By the way, in Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
So good luck, Florida State. Good luck. Other than that, have a great weekend. You got anything else for the good people?
No, we could talk about, the only other thing I had written down was all this field storming stuff. I don't really think it matters. It's just more expensive.
Oh, yeah, we could talk about that next week because
we'll do that next week.
Well, Alabama's
and about IR.
Alabama. Okay, I like that. Alabama so sensitive to people that beat you. Like you're Alabama. Get over it. You got a tough permanent crossover schedule because you're Alabama, and people like to storm the field on you because you're Alabama. You don't get that way unless you win all the championships. So you have all the championships. Shut up. Did we just do the whole segment?
Well, except for if you do that, now the visiting school gets the money instead of the SEC. So I would just be like, hey, if you're going to beat us and storm the field at least, so we get $500,000 out of it.
Okay, all right, there you go.
It makes it more interesting, but
yeah, that's fair.
I don't know.
All right, well, everybody out there, have a great weekend. Where can the people follow you and on all the platforms?
Aaron_Dugan on Instagram, the Aaron Dugan on Twitter that I don't really use.
Yeah, no, you don't even retweet the show. You don't even share the show.
I'm
asking our audience to share the show, and she doesn't even share her own show. You can follow me. You can get to me, interact with me at Braden Gall. At 440 Sports as well. Check out the YouTube page. We do appreciate you guys. Thanks for hanging out. We'll talk to you next week. This has been Fringe Element on the 440 Sports Network.
I'll go retro tweet everything now. Too late? Don't know.